talking about the member of the opposition speech. And I think that the member of opposition speech is probably consistently the one which I think is, I don't know if I want to say done poorly, but done wrong strategically. I don't think that most MOs I see are addressing and trying to come at the problem of doing the MO and what I consider to be a structurally sound and strategically sound way of doing so. So I think that doing an MO really well is probably the thing I see least. I see a lot of good PMR, a lot of good MGs, lots of good various whatevers, but a really good MO is, I think, in a lot of ways the most powerful speech and isn't one that you see all that much. I think the main reason for that is because there's really a pretty strict dividing line between the member of government and MG speech. Like, in the first half of the member of government and the member of opposition speech, in the first half of the debate, the PMC, LOC, MG, everything is about setting up your options for later. It's getting the arguments out that you will then be winning on in later speeches. You are never winning around in the MG or the LOC. Maybe somebody drops something later, and because of that argument you made there, it becomes the round winner, but you're never going to have won a round in one of those speeches. And so because of that, I think that everything that happens after that, the MO, LOR, and PMR, are just a different game. And people treat rebuttals differently. People treat the rebuttals, LOR and PMR, different than they do most of the constructive speeches, but I still feel like people approach a member of opposition as if they're just doing an MG, but on the other side of the debate. And I don't think that really makes sense, and it leads you to, there's a lot of member of governments have to be mechanical and repetitive and covering everything. It's your only chance to respond to stuff, so you need to be kind of that mechanical in order to effectively do it. But I think people apply a lot of the same skills they learn in becoming an MG to the MO, and they're very, very different because, again, the MO is about picking the argument you are winning and about why that argument is more important than other arguments. It's not about setting up options for you to put down late for the PMR to go to later and win. So that's, I think, the first structural characteristic that's kind of unique to the MO is that there's that dividing line in terms of where we go from setting up how you're going to be winning the debate to actually going about winning the debate. Okay, we've given our arguments, and now here's why our arguments are better than their arguments. Comparison, not just getting them out. I think the next structural characteristic that's really unique to the member of opposition is the fact that while you can collapse a little bit in the MG in certain very slight instances if you're trying to make a fun strategic play or something, the MO is the first speech where collapsing becomes a really viable strategic option, and it's the type of thing that you can literally make the last 4 minutes of somebody's speech, the previous speech, just not matter anymore. Okay, well, we're going to go for the K. So all of your great turns in the disad aren't going to matter. And pretty much any other time if someone makes really good arguments against you, you have to answer those really good arguments. The MO often don't. And so I think, you control the debate in the MO in terms of where you want it to go. If there's a really good LOC argument, an MG has to deal with that, has to come to terms with it. If there's a really good MG argument, in a lot of instances, the MO is able to kind of work around that, and through strategic issue selection, is able to neutralize the best, most strategic options that the government team has going for them. So not only is it something that you get the time trade-offs associated with collapsing, it's obviously, if they spent 4 minutes on the K and 4 minutes on the counter plan, and you just go for the K, you have 8 minutes to respond to their 4 minutes of answer. So there's an obviously beneficial ability and time trade-off there. But there's also the ability, the strategic choice that you're able to make and to put the debate on, make the debate be decided upon the issues that you want it to be decided upon, and make that part of the debate matter. This kind of relates to what I said at first, but it's a little bit a different way of putting it. I think that the MO is the first speech where, except in rare circumstances, you aren't going to be making new arguments in it. And because you're not going to be making new arguments, you need to be, your thought in this is not, our argument is good. It is, our argument is better than their argument. That is the thing that the MO needs to prove. Obviously, this is true on a somewhat intuitive level, but there are so many times where you will see people extending an argument in a speech that everyone agreed on a different piece of paper, doesn't matter, or everyone has already decided because of the way that the debate has happened and things that have occurred, okay, well, we originally made that, but then both teams are going for that argument, so we don't really need to extend our minute-long impact scenario about why dehumanization is bad if both teams are going for dehum impacts. We don't need to do that. And so because of that, you don't need to, since you know what the government team is going to say, you're able to only answer to, you're the first speech that's able to compare your arguments to their arguments. Every other speech is, our argument's really good. And there's a little bit of comparison that takes place in the LOC versus the PM, and then the AF to the MG, but there's so much of a requirement to be getting new stuff out there that there's the first time when you actually have the ability to, well, let's take some time and think about it and really weigh these two things out. That's what you get to do in the MO for the first time. So I think that part of being good MO in LO combination is within your partnership kind of skill selecting. I think that in a lot of ways, the debater that's more mechanically and technically sound can be in the LOC because there's a need to get off or to get arguments out there. But the debater who more intuitively understands weighing and kind of able to tell a different story and conceptualize the argument and explain why one's better than the other, that's more suited in my mind to the MO. And it's not to say that the MO doesn't need to be technically proficient, certainly not, but that there are a few things about the MO, the fact that it doesn't have, that you can collapse. If you're not the strongest or quickest or most technical debater, some of those issues can be slightly hidden in the MO, and if you're better at comparison and weighing things out, that's the MO is the place where you get to do that more than any other speech because you've got the LOR to back you up and you aren't really time crunched and you can collapse. So you can just pick about what you want to talk about and talk about it for 8 minutes. And it's really the only speech where you have that flexibility. So partner selection and determining who's best at certain skills is, I think, important to any successful debate partnership, but the MO is a particularly relevant example of how that's true. A lot of times I think in Parley you're seeing double leaders and double members now, and this isn't something that really makes sense to me. The LO and the MG to me are very similar speeches because they are, here's our responses, okay, you've got our arguments, these are our arguments in response, and we're going to give a bunch of options for the people later in the debate to go and collapse to. And the PM and the MO are the ones who are using the stuff that was done by those earlier speeches and selecting, okay, they gave us a bunch of options, the yellow gave me a bunch of options that I could go for, I'm gonna pick this one and sit on it, and that's the same thing that the PMR does, and so that's kind of the logical partner differential in my mind, but everybody's different, so do what works best for you, but I think that's kind of the advice that I always tend to give. So let's talk about collapsing for a little bit, because that's probably you got to do it well, and if you do it well, holy man, is it strategically viable. I mean, it's like, again, you can spend an entire 8-minute speech talking about something that the MG only has a minute of responses on. And that means that if you're able to spend that much time on an argument, you should be winning it. And I think that's a really valuable thing to have, but so many times you'll see teams collapse, and they'll collapse just because it seems like, okay, well, I'm going to go for this argument now, or I like my disad a little bit better than the critique, so I'm going to go for that. And it doesn't seem, a lot of times you'll see people choose to collapse, but collapse poorly, or collapse to the wrong thing. So there are 3 things, in my eyes, that you have to consider when collapsing. Those 3 things are, first off, how well do I know the arguments? This is one that's something to be considered. But I think it's, in a lot of ways, most people make their decision based on, I feel stronger about my disad, or I know more about the economy, so I want to go for BizCon instead of the politics advantage. The second one is, what's the best answered? Has been better answered by the government team. This is a path of least resistance type of thing. Like, it's, sure, I might know a lot more about BizCon than politics, but they drop links 2, 3, and 4, and only have one bad link turn that we've already kind of preempted. So even though I don't know it, I know that I feel better about the fact that I can go for politics. And the third one seems probably like the least important, but in a lot of ways is the most important, and it's what's easy to kick out of. I'm going to have a couple examples towards the end of the lecture where we're going to basically say, in this instance, or how do we go about collapsing, but in terms of just talking about the process, there are going to be some times where there will be a no link, or something that says, this just doesn't happen. That's really easy to, in the MO, say, extend their number 3 argument, the no link, that these people don't care about this, so won't be angry whenever plan is passed. That's a complete, no one cares about the AF. It's not an offensive, no, people really like the AF and it makes it more, no, it's just, this is not, X is not related to Y. That's incredibly easy to kick out of. There's also, your impact's inevitable, or there's no difference between your impact and another impact. So if someone says that global warming is inevitable, you know, so your dissent doesn't matter because it's going to happen regardless. Well, they might have spent 2 minutes answering your global warming disadvantage, and you can spend 5 seconds then extending their no impact argument and getting out of it. It's very easy to kick out of. The corollary to that is there are some things that are a lot more difficult to kick out of, and even if, say for example, someone has only put non-uniques and linked terms on a disadvantage, there's no argument of theirs that you can then extend to make the debate not matter, or make that position no longer matter. If you extend a non-unique when they're link turning the position, all that means is your link turn's better. Because, yeah, plan isn't going to happen, this isn't going to happen in the status quo, that's what the non-unique is. Plan makes it actually more likely to happen, that's the link term. So extending the non-unique just strengthens and supercharges that, and makes offensive that link term. So because they're connected, there's no easy argument that you can single out and pick out in which to easily make the position disappear. So something that has a clean kick can be very valuable because you want to maximize your prep time and eliminate confusion. And if you're having to spend a bunch of time reading arguments, okay, we're not going for politics, but they only know unique and link turned it, so I'm going to have to kind of shadow answer, you know, a bunch of their link turns and say, no, these really don't matter. And then you spend a minute on a piece of paper in the MO that you're not even going to be going for, and it muddles the debate, confuses the debate, whereas an easy, clean kick can. Sometimes it's better to go for a slightly worse argument if you can eliminate any confusion and have 7.5 minutes to focus on that argument than it is to go for a slightly better argument, but it's confusing as to how you get there and you can only spend 5 minutes instead of the 7.5 that you could otherwise. So being able to realize that sometimes the clean kick is more important than the absolute best strategic argument given the context of the round. So we'll talk about that in depth a little, or we'll give an example or two of that a little bit towards the end. But in order, the reason that being in the MO is fun is because you can kick out of stuff, talk about the things that you want to talk about, and just here's the argument I think we're winning, and here's why it's more important than their argument. And that's really all you have to do. And so that's why I love the speech, but if you can't collapse well, you can't access any of all that stuff. Like, being good at collapsing and intuitively understanding that is what allows you to capitalize on the structural characteristics that are unique to the MO that kind of allow you to be good at it. It's like the type of thing that it should be cheating, but is not. Like, the fact that they have to spend 1 minute answering this, and you have 8 minutes to contextualize and counter the responses to it. Like, there's, man, is that an advantage, but people don't take advantage of it nearly as much as they should. So, being good at collapsing, it's important. The next part that I want to talk about is that being a good MO begins in prep time. And prep time, I think, for a lot of teams when they're on the negative is, what's the LOC going to say? It's what are the arguments that we're going to be reading in our first speech? And that's important, and you have to answer that, but really the question you should be asking yourself is, what's the MO going to be saying? What are we going to be winning this debate on? And since the MO is going to be the one that's actually winning the argument, that will be comparing the argument they have to the counter-argument provided by the other team and really going and comparing which one is better. I think the MO needs to have a lot more knowledge about the specifics and unique characteristics of the argument than the LO does. And I think a lot of teams tend to reverse that a little bit, that it's like, well, the LO is going to be talking first, so we need to be getting them into the right frame of mind so they understand it. And obviously, of course, the LO needs to understand the argument, but I think that's the you want to be trying to predict how the debate's going to be going in prep time, understanding that, and then being able to kind of tailor your arguments throughout along that line. And you're not really able to do that if the MO doesn't have a complete grasp of the strategic implications of the argument until prep time's over. Like, Western prep does this all the time. I think I've got him to stop, but like where they just split the leader and the member. It's like you're going to be writing these positions and you're going to be writing these positions. And yes, it can be helpful to get more stuff out, but then I feel like a lot of times the main position that disad that the teams would go for, the MO didn't hear about it until like there were 2 minutes left in prep and they were walking to the room and this is the argument. Yeah, it's like if this is your main disad, what you're going to be going for. The MO needs to know that at the time, right? The MO needs to be the one who's being told if they're either writing it themselves or being told by the coach, here's why we're running this argument. You want the LO can just if one partner has to understand it and the nuances and ins and outs a little better, you would want that person to be in the LOC because they can kind of just read the argument, and if there's any unclarity or miscommunication, you know, most people are fine with the MO helping out to explain in the POI. Most people are generally fine with that, but if the MO gets in and doesn't really understand the thesis behind the criticism that you're running, then it's going to be very, very difficult to collapse to that and spend 8 minutes talking about why your K is any better than the AF if you don't have that actual, real, thorough understanding. So I think that the MO needs to be should be determining the strategy, because the MO is the one who, I've said this a lot, but is the one who's going to be winning the debate. So it might be, if there's a disagreement, like the LOC wants to go more towards the disad and spend more time in prep focused on that, and the MO wants to tend more towards the critical, well, the LO might read both of those arguments, but the MO is the one that has to be picking it and going to it and deciding upon it and winning it. So even if, I don't care, you could write the best disad shell in the world, and the MG responses are okay but not great, and if the MO doesn't really know it or understand it, it's easy to mishandle one little argument here or there that a PMR can blow up and make it do a big deal. And because that's something that's so easy to mishandle, those little arguments, I want the MO to be the one who's been thinking about really getting and understanding the argument during prep time. The LO is a little bit more complementary to the MO on that point. The next thing I want to talk about in the MO is warrant comparison. And I think the way to, sorry, I'm sweating so much, you guys. I'm not used to the humidity. But the warrant that you want to go for, or the warrant comparison is the type of thing that very rarely gets done in parliamentary debate. You know, it's not something that you see nearly enough of. And so being just okay at warrant comparison, doing a little bit of it kind of well, you've got a huge jump on the game because so many people aren't doing any of it. What I mean by warrant comparison is, or I think an example of what not to do is probably the best way to explain it. A lot of times you'll see advantage one, the economy. And it'll say manufacturing is up and this number was good. And then the first disad is the economy. And there's another stat that is different than the one that was previous, but it's something that paints the economy as bad. And then the MG excuse me, the economy is good in the status quo. And then the MG comes up, it's like, their non-uniques can't be true. They've conceded our uniqueness points. And the MO comes up and responds, their non-uniques to our disad aren't true. They've conceded the uniqueness points of our disad. And so people are pulling the drops of one team isn't answering specific arguments and just providing parallel arguments about the economy that don't really clash in any way, just they're about the economy. And then they say, well, you didn't answer ours. And they say, well, you didn't answer ours. Well, you didn't answer ours. And that happens an unbelievable amount as a judge. The number of times that you find yourself in a debate saying, well, they said this and they said this, but I don't know why I would care one way or the other. There's no argumentation about preferencing one of those over the other. So let's say, for example, there is a jobs report and warrant on the affirmative that says the economy is really bad because unemployment skyrocketed last month. And the negative says, no, our disad says that manufacturing starts have increased hugely, and there's some other stat that we have. And then the MG stands up and says, extend that jobs fell a huge amount last month. And they don't answer the specifics. And so then it's just jobs versus manufacturing. Jobs, we say jobs, or they say jobs are bad, so therefore economy bad. We say manufacturing's on the upswing, therefore economy good. The MO, remember what we talked about how much time they have? That's what it's for. Is, okay, here's why manufacturing's a more important indicator or a better indicator for economic health or in the status quo than unemployment reports are. So they say unemployment matters, we say manufacturing matters. The MO is our first speech that has the time to say manufacturing is a better warrant and indicator for the health of the economy because X, Y, and Z. That's what you're doing all of the collapsing for and getting the time trade-offs that come with it. You're doing that because it gives you the time to say, okay, everyone's made their argument. Now, here's why the arguments that we've made are better than the arguments that they've made.
So this is where you would make, like, our root cause argument means that their impacts will come to our side.
Mm-hmm. And so let's say that the affirmative does something to limit greenhouse gas pollution and tries to solve global warming. And you're on the neg and you have a disad to the economy saying that this regulation makes businesses hurt and causes economic collapse. Then they'll get up and say, no, we need to solve global warming in order to help the economy, and green tech will solve and provide a boost to the economy, all of these things. At the end of the day, when you get to the MO, and you know you're going to be weighing those two out, what's nice is you have the time to, okay, so they say this, they say that we need to solve pollution in order to do this. We say we need to help the economy. And that's when you can you can even have thought experiments of, yeah, well, if we had all of this economic growth, then it would spur massive amounts of technological investment in various new things. Doing that is, even if not originally intended to be for green energy, will likely improve science enough in such a way that it will make it so that we're able to develop new technologies that are capable of solving for global warming, which current renewable energy isn't capable of solving for global warming. Something along those lines. And that's the type of thing that you never be able to make that argument in the MO, and I did a kind of a poor job of saying it in a concise way, but you'd never be able to make that argument in the MG, because if you were to do so, it would take too long to kind of set up that, imagine this, I'm thinking this makes more sense. Like, there's too much going on earlier in the debate to have those type of arguments, and so Absolutely. That's where you do your root cause arguments. That's where you do our, they say that stimulus will, if plan is to pass a stimulus package of government spending to help the economy, they say that will help the economy by putting more money in people's pockets. We say that will hurt the economy because it'll be seen as irresponsible, and that perception of irresponsibility by the U.S. government will make people worry about a default, so they'll stop spending and they'll clamp down because of that. So they've got the government spending versus our fear of irresponsibility leads to decrease in economic activity. So why is our link more predictive than theirs? That's what, if you've been having in prep time and you've written the argument, you've been thinking to yourself this entire time, hey, I know exactly what the 3 links that we're going for on this piece of paper are. I have so much time in which I'm able to then think to myself about that, do that comparison in my head, and be able to explain it in such a way that makes sense and hits home to the critic. So it's the making connections between everything speech in a lot of ways. You know, everything else is making the debate. It goes bigger. That dividing line I was talking about at the beginning of the lecture of the first half of the debate is about getting your arguments out there, and then the latter half of the debate about picking your arguments and winning those arguments. In a lot of ways, it can be seen as the first half of the debate makes everything bigger, and then once the MO starts, it's making everything back smaller again and bringing. So yeah, there's been a lot of stuff we've been talking about throughout this, but here's how it all relates back together to the one thing that is really important. Is, you know, this one binary. This is better than this. Like, there's going to be 100 different arguments going on in an individual debate round, but the judge has to make the binary decision of this is better than this, and being able to connect everything and say, we win this, it doesn't matter if they win this, this, or this, all of those things, and making those connections and making it small and simple is what the MO is good for, and what's fun to do about the MO. Oh, did someone have their hand up over there? Or?
Oh, no, you were
Okay. Want to make sure we have at least like 10 or 15 minutes to do some examples. So the last thing I'll talk about before going on, since I've talked about collapsing a lot, I want to talk about picking what's your effective strategy. We talked about what's easy to kick and such like that. There are a lot of critics and a lot of coaches who I think will tell you to collapse to one thing. And in a lot of times that makes a lot of sense. And when you're starting out, it's probably good to just pick a disad or a disad in the counter plan or something, and just go for that and kick out of some case terms or the other disad or the K that you were also talking about at the time. Just make it small. But I think that teams do that too quickly in a lot of ways. And once you feel comfortable and quick and efficient in that you can do all this quickly, I would much rather also have I'm going to put 80-90% of my focus on this one argument or set of arguments in the MO. And then I'm also going to give myself something. And even if you don't buy the thing that I've been going for, there's still this case turnover here that I don't think they've answered enough. And I think if we win that's another thing that we can. I like to give myself an out because Parley is a very imprecise activity. You know, it's not like there's prep time and cross-ex back and forth where we can just actually, you know, have a conversation to really talk about it. It's just they get up, speak really fast, we get up without talking to them about it, speak fast. There's very little. It's much easier to misunderstand an argument and slightly not hear it correctly, and there's less ability for you to make up for that mistake later. So that's why I personally think that if you can do it, and if you feel comfortable doing it, and if you feel like you have enough time to deal with the disad counterpoint you're collapsing to in 6 minutes, do that and go for a little bit of a tea for 2 minutes, or give yourself something of an option as an out. That's my opinion on that. There are a lot of coaches who will say, no, you should just, if you're going for ticks in the counter plan, screw anything else. Just go for ticks in the counter plan. And if you do that, great, but that was just my opinion on it, and I think it might be a little against the grain and against the norm, so I want to get it in now. So you just don't hear that and think, oh, you never want to collapse to more than one thing. It's like, well, maybe, occasionally, you might want to collapse to more than one thing. Sometimes it's a good idea. So just always have that in the back of your head that, to me, I would, if the choice is between, if I feel like I don't have enough time to spend 6 minutes going for an argument and 2 minutes going for my backup, God, it seems to me like the better thing to do is work on being more efficient so I can do that, instead of just saying, well, don't have time and I'm not going to open up I'm not going to have backup options when I'm collapsing to them. I would always just rather really try to get more efficient and give myself that backup option. And I think that people don't do that. They don't do that when they're learning because they don't have enough time, and then they've learned how and are efficient and can do it in the time allotted, but then they think to themselves, well, I've always done it by just collapsing into one thing and not giving myself an out, and then they've become efficient enough after practice to where they do have the time for it, but it just doesn't, they don't do it as much. And so I think always have that in the back of your mind. So we're gonna now do an example of picking what to kick. So this is gonna take a little bit of time for me to write up a shell and write up some responses. So Nick, why don't you spend 1 or 2 minutes telling them what you think makes a good MO?
Well, that is challenging given that I did not do a single MO in my entire debate career.
But you watched a lot of them. What was difficult for you when people did good things?
Okay, so I mean, in my mind, the job of the MO is, I'm just going to approach this from the mindset of the LOR, really, because the LOR is the speech I gave. One of the biggest things the MO has to do is the MO has to ensure that there is an ability to split the block in a way that minimizes LOR overlap with MO responsibilities. So in other words, there's no it's not like policy debate where you can split the block by having the MO take, like, say, the disad and the counterplan, and the LOR takes topicality. Like, that's not allowed. However, you can still split the block in the sense that you divide up argument focus. So, for example, when I was the LOR, one of the things that I like to do was give LORs that were like 3 or 4 minutes of impact calculus, and literally nothing except impact calculus. However, in order for that to work, the LOR has to be in communication with the MO, and the MO needs to understand that his or her job is to not do impact calculus, right? To save that responsibility for the LOR, that you minimize the amount of overlap, right? The impact calculus in the LOR is not new, but the MO has to set up that impact calculus by extending all the relevant arguments that that allow for that impact calculus to occur. For things like, solvency differential, stuff like that. That all has to be done in the MO, so it lays the groundwork for the LOR, but the LOR should hopefully be totally different from the MO. And that way it's the most strategic use of your time, since it gives essentially the PMR 12 minutes of stuff to respond to instead of only 8 minutes.
Good. I've been writing too much of this down here. So we're gonna go quicker. MG responses. The first. So as I'm doing this, we're gonna do 2 different examples or activities using this kind of shell and set of responses. The first one we're gonna do is about what can we collapse to, and the second is going to be about warrant comparison. We'll also make a non-unique argument that down as well. So let's say our plan is going to be something along the lines of regulating and taxing companies for the amount of carbon pollution that they permit. And we run an econ DA and say, econ's pretty good in the SQO, and business confidence is improving, that small businesses have been shown to be spending more money. Insert the stat we found in prep time here. The U.S. government's recently given and shown a commitment to continued aid to support small businesses, so people know that they've got someone, if things get rough, that the government has a willingness and an ability to kind of go to bat for them. But the plan hurts business confidence because now it makes them fear regulation. If they're going to start regulating on this, what's the next new thing I'm going to have to pay taxes on? What's the next new thing that all of a sudden they're going to be hitting for me? And it just takes money out of their pocket. You know, this was money that they had to invest in new things or pay their people more or any of these things. Now they don't have it. The CISA point is that causes a double-dip recession, economic collapse. Economic collapse leads to extinction, blah-de-blah-de, blah-de-blah. That's going to be what our dissent was. They, then the MG comes up and is saying, excuse me, whoops. I was doing this the wrong way. Man. Damn. So our non-uniques are that no, you're saying that everything looks peachy for the economy, but no, the economy's super bad. The stock market has gone way down in the status quo, and unemployment's up. Then the MG says, also, plan makes it better. It decreases regulatory uncertainty, so now these companies have been fearing they're going to be regulated. Now they know what they're going to be doing, and it spurs innovation in green technology, which will be a key industry going forward. Key economic industry. Will be another reason why it might help the economy. I'm asking. Throw them out here. Why might taxing carbon help the economy?
You mean?
Yeah.
Why might taxing carbon help the economy?
Mm-hmm.
Because the government will collect that money and they'll put it into work projects.
Government revenue, relation, increases spending. And then other countries like us, because we're taking a lead on greenhouse gases, so they're more likely to trade with us and we're able to do stuff like that. Equals more trade. And they're also going to have one argument in the MG of no impact, economy's resilient, we've had bad things happen before, and it hasn't led to the type of collapse that they're talking about. So this is a pretty obvious example if you were trying to look for something to collapse towards. it's a perfect example because they've got a bunch of arguments on the non-unique and link level of this disadvantage. You could try and go for every one of those and explain, no, we're winning the uniqueness level of the debate, we think our link is stronger, blah, 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 blah. Or, let's say you've got another argument that you like better. If they've got something like that at the bottom, even if you think that they're winning every single argument and destroying you and have embarrassed you on every argument you've made on every other piece of this, other part of this paper, if you got that and are good at leveraging it, that there's, not going to reach the crazy economic impacts that they're talking about, and we're winning global warming, therefore that's what matters, or something along those lines, then that argument, even though you've been embarrassed for the 2 minutes previously when they were just reading arguments that were so much better than what you'd written in the shell, were just kicking your ass. Well, they read that at the end and you can just, glad I don't have to answer those. Moving on, and go from there. So, always be on the lookout for little things like this. Basically, any argument that says, X won't care, or this person won't care, or this group won't care, or this doesn't matter, or this doesn't happen. Anything that's, this is bad, or a turn, no, this makes something more likely to happen. Any argument really that has those keywords in it, it's not an easy one to kick, or to choose as the argument to kick. But if it says that won't happen, or people don't care about that, that's just a negative. That's not something somebody's gonna get mad, or anything like that. That's the thing that you've said is gonna happen will not happen. That is the argument that you want to be at the lookout for. So let's say that they'd read all of these link terms, but instead of it being on the bottom, there was an argument regulations on carbon coming in the squall makes impacts inevitable. So let's say, they're going to say, look, if regulating and taxing greenhouse gas emissions is enough to cause this freak out that causes economic collapse, well, there's going to be a regulation on carbon fuel standards are going to be increased, and there's going to be all sorts of things like that that are going to be happening in the future. And so the impact's inevitable. That's an attack on link uniqueness. Link uniqueness attacks in a lot of ways, they're the ones that you want to go for uniqueness overwhelms the link. If it's impact uniqueness, that can be a bad thing to be doing because it's usually the affirmative saying, the economy's terrible right now, and so we need to do something to make it better. If the economy is terrible right now, and you're arguing uniqueness overwhelms the link, well, it's not going to get that much. So you're basically just saying, the economy's never going to get better, whatever, is what you're saying. And that's not necessarily the most strategic position you want to be in. But that's impact uniqueness, because your impact is economic collapse, and so whether the economy is good or bad, or what have you, or not collapsing or going to collapse, that's a question of impact uniqueness. The question, link uniqueness is a little bit different, because the link is that businesses are going to freak out because of carbon regulations. So if you can prove that's going to happen, that's an instance where the link uniqueness might overwhelm the link. And in that instance, that can be an effective, good strategic argument to be kicking. So basically, anything that says that won't happen, or anything that says if that's enough to make it happen, then X or Y or Z will cause it, those are the two types of arguments that you want to be looking for. Now, let's assume they didn't make any last argument here. all they did was non-unique and link turn your econ dised. And so if all they did was non-unique and link turn your econ disad, and let's say you either didn't have another disadvantage, or you did and it was really bad, and you don't want to go for it because they beat that even worse than this one. And there's nothing easy to kick. You've got to be going for this. Let's talk about warrant comparison real quick. What I mean by warrant comparison is the MO's job is to say, okay, on the uniqueness, small business spending is the key indicator to the economy because, and the reason that's true is because, and trying to think of reasons, small businesses, are the most likely to open new branches, start new construction, do various things, blah, 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 any reason that you can think of. It's been a while since I've had an econ debate, so all of my stock answers are not, really in my head. But when you have, all you need to prove is that, if this is what your argument is that small business spending is a better indicator for what's going to happen with the economy than the stock market and unemployment. So you will, want their uniqueness bad. Stock market, bad indicator. Unemployment is a lagging indicator. It's from data like 6 months ago, not really accurate, and always gets adjusted up and down, so it doesn't really mean anything. Their uniqueness arguments use bad metrics. Ours are more important and better indicators because of X, Y, Z. What you usually see is on their non-uniques, these don't matter because they've conceded their argument that small business spending is increasing. Small business spending increasing means the economy can't be bad. And then the PMR says, what does small businesses matter? I don't care about small businesses. They've conceded the stock market and unemployment high in the status quo means that the economy is awful. Being the first person to get beyond that he said, she said, back and forth is, and starting to clearly delineate the pros and cons of something, that's where you're winning the debate. And why the MO is fun and interesting is this, here's what they said, here's what we said, here's why we're better. It's very simple. Make the MO can a lot of times be talking about 2-3 arguments. Well, if we prove that small business is the most important indicator, we prove that global warming is inevitable, and we prove that economic collapse has a good chance of causing war. If you prove those things and just spend 2 minutes talking about each of those, a lot of times you can have won an MO without having really done much else. You don't need to go argument by argument and by argument. You can be thinking much more globally and winning. Remove yourself from the need to be line by line. You think you have to, but you don't. And people say, oh, well, there's the LOR after me, so I'll just let them do the weighing, and I'll be line by line, that's the way to do it. No. Because then the MO is just saying a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. Because if you're able to correctly do it, you can say, well, if I win these 3 arguments, then I'm definitely going to win the debate. And if that's the case, then there's not really much reason why you should be talking about anything else. So find those arguments, win them, make the structure of the debate your own in the MO. Don't play the MG's game. Don't answer their arguments just line by line. Make the debate your own again. We've probably got no time, so thank you. You can ask me questions whenever, or if anything I said was unclear, all that jazz.